Hey, what's up guys? Pete with Auto Repair Tips. In this video, working on an 09 Toyota. Customer says they're hearing brake noise coming from the right front. This is not going to be pretty much a how-to video to fix a brake. It's just going to be a tutorial on things to look for when you're doing a brake job. Well, first of all, when you're driving and you hit the brake, sometimes that sound kind of travels around, and this is what I'm talking about. He says he's hearing it from the right front. Well, we're looking at the right front, and I'm just spinning the wheel and you don't hear anything. Go back here to the right rear and listen. So things aren't always what they seem. Sometimes you think you're hearing something in the right front, but you're driving along and that noise is bouncing off, whether you're in a tunnel or you're outside by houses. That noise will bounce off, so it'll give you the appearance of a right front, but it could be a right rear. So make sure you check that stuff out thoroughly. Now we're going to take this right rear apart and we're going to look at it, and I'm going to show you different things to look for when you're doing your brake job. All right guys, one of the first things you can look for when you're checking your brakes is, if you look right here where the pad is, and this is your caliper bracket, that's a slide in there. And if you can look on if your pad is good and fat, that pad will be sitting way out here. But if you look at this one here, it is way inside. It's almost against the rotor. So the next thing we'll do is we'll take the pad off and we'll look. Plus, he's been hearing the noise for a while, and if you look inside here, you can see it's grooved out, because that's your wear indicator right there. And that wear indicator is causing that groove because it's right in line where that is. So if you start hearing noise, don't ride a long time, because if you gouge out too much of your metal on your rotor, then you got to replace your rotor. So make sure if you start hearing noise, check it immediately. All right, so this is what it looks like. This is your wear indicator. And as you can see, they've been hearing noise for a while, because if you look right here, this pad is already down to the metal. And here's a little bit of pad right here. I mic'd out the rotor, and the rotor is definitely not enough there to turn, and it has got grooves all the way across it. Something like this can be avoided, like I was telling you earlier. If you hear your noise, check it immediately. Next thing we want to look at is you want to make sure you check your rubber brake line. This one looks good. It's nice and it's nice and soft. It's not super hard and brittle. There's no cracks in it. Look at your caliper right here. There's a boot that goes around it. The boot is nice and clean. There's no brake fluid. There's no cracks. Looks good. We'll clean the caliper up, and then we'll go to push it in. When you go to push this in, it should go in nice and smooth. Fights you going in or doesn't want to go in, that means your caliper's sticking. Most likely this one I'm sure is fine, because all the indications look good. Another thing to think about is, if you go to check your brake fluid in your master cylinder and you notice it considerably low and you don't have any leaks, chances are you have worn pads or worn brake shoes. What happens is, when the pad gets thinner, the fluid gets lower. Now when I go to push this piston back in, it's going to raise that fluid back up. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's go check out this reservoir. All right guys, so check this out. This is your brake reservoir, and this is your max fill line. See how the fluid is not even up to the fill line? It's way down there. It's because those rear pads are low. That's what I'm talking about. A lot of times if you need to check your brakes, take off the reservoir cap, and if you see that fluid is low and you don't have any leaks anywhere, check your brakes. All right guys, once I remove the caliper bracket, we always check the slides, make sure they move in and out easily, and they do. Make sure the rubber boots aren't ripped, and they aren't. So these here, we'll just take them off. We'll get a little bit of caliper grease. We'll grease up the pins and put them back on. When you go back with the caliper bracket, the bolt that secures that bracket, make sure you put a little bit of blue Loctite. All you need is blue, you don't need red. All right, if your rotor's stuck on there, most rotors come with threaded holes right here. It's just easy to put a bolt in there. Screw them in a little bit at a time. And that usually breaks them loose. And just take them off. Easy as that, guys. When you have it apart, make sure you take a second to go look at the emergency brake. This one still has plenty of meat left on it. Make sure the springs look good and all the hardware kit is in place. Make sure when you go back with your brake rotor, you clean it good with some CRC, both sides, and don't put your greasy hands back on it. And by doing that, you have a nice clean surface, no contamination at all. All right, these pads didn't come in a hardware kit. You have to buy them separately, but I looked this hardware kit over and there's nothing wrong with this hardware kit. They're just a little dirty. We'll take a little bit of sandpaper, we'll scuff them up, and then we'll take the caliper grease and we're gonna grease brackets right here and here. It doesn't take a lot of grease, but wherever you have metal that's gonna be rubbing like this, you wanna make sure you put grease in those spots there just to help it slide. After you sand it and grease it up, this is what it should look like. You don't need to be an overkill on the grease, just a little bit will be just fine. All right, I'm using 120 grit paper. Just make sure that on your caliper, you clean it up really good. There's no excessive grease or debris or dirt or anything on it. And I sanded up the ends here. This is where the pads are gonna meet. That way they have a flat surface to hit to. All right, so that's where we're at so far. I've got the bracket on there, greased up the slides, greased up the hardware kit. I have the brake pads on there, everything's nice and good. Now we're gonna push the piston back. So here's a little trick. If you don't have a tool, you set the old pad right here, get a pair of vice grips, and just squeeze. A little bit more of a pain in the butt, but it works. Then you have to move it in a little bit, make it a little bit tighter on the vice grips, and squeeze. And normally everybody has a set of vice grips at the house. Not everybody has a tool to do brakes with. You just do it till it's flush, and there you go. All right, guys, this is what it should look like when it's done. Last thing I want to tell you is make sure, check your brake fluid, pump up your brake before you take off. You follow these steps, guys, and it should go pretty smooth for you. I'm not going to say you're not going to have a hiccup, because if you're working on cars, you're always going to have a hiccup, but you can always get through it. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Appreciate you watching. Catch you later.